Hey everybody, welcome to Roman Just Codes. I am Roman, Google developer expert in Flutter, and I am really excited to share this short video series on state management in Flutter with Riverpod Code Generation while we build a cool little project. In this series, we will explore Flutter apps state and build apps that are organized, scalable, and a joy to maintain. Get ready to unlock the power of Riverpod and its awesome code generation capabilities. In this first episode, we will lay down the foundation for our state management journey. We will install Riverpod, explore its core concepts, and set up code generation to streamline our development process. Now, if you end up liking this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future Flutter content coming my way. Thank you so much for your support. Okay, so let's be honest. Building modern Flutter applications could be a real headache. Fetching data, handling loading states, caching, and keeping everything in sync, it's enough to make your head spin. Flutter's built-in state management tools are a good start, but they often leave you to grapple with complex asynchronous challenges. And that's where Riverpod comes to the rescue. Riverpod is a powerful reactive caching and data binding framework, which is also used as a state management library that simplifies how you handle asynchronous operations in Flutter. It's like having a super efficient assistant that takes care of all the heavy lifting for you, so you can focus on building beautiful, responsive UIs. Riverpod is inspired by Flutter's declarative widget system, making it very intuitive and easy to learn. It's like building your application's logic with the same elegance and efficiency as your UI. Riverpod Code Generation simplifies how you define providers, making your code more readable and maintainable. It offers a cleaner syntax, automatic provider type selection, and greater flexibility for passing parameters. While optional now, it is the recommended approach for future-proofing your Flutter applications and unlocking Riverpod's full potential. So, let's get started. So basically, this is the project that we will be tackling in this video series. I want to pay homage to my home country of the Dominican Republic. I want to build like an interactive map, and you will be able to, for example, the features of this application is like an interactive map. It will have a way for you to tackle, like for example, like for you to toggle the labels. You could like the names of the provinces in the Dominican Republic. Like we want to show the whole island. This is, by the way, an SVG that I copied from Wikipedia, and then this is just an SVG that I split it into multiple pieces so I can then bring it into the application and assemble it, and then that way we can toggle those things. You'll be able to toggle like the coastal line, the borders of the provinces. You're gonna see like the lakes in the Dominican Republic, the rivers, the map itself, and then you're going to be able to kind of like see it in this form right here. Like people will be able to just toggle things on and off. You would be able to also see all the provinces on the right hand side as a list, and we will actually tap into some public APIs that are available for those capabilities. And also you will see like the regions below. So this is what the final product will look like. It will look like this. You would be able to toggle the items, like some of those options on or off. You can just, click them like that. On the right hand side, you will be able to see all the provinces. Like I just assigned random colors to it. You can just click on them individually and you can see them. You can just uncheck them all or off. You can see, for example, like one individual region. So the individual provinces take precedence. You can just check them on or off. You can toggle which region you want to see. And of course, like I mentioned, you're going to be able to switch between English or Spanish. You can see the labels changing accordingly. Even some of the images, some of the SVGs switch between English and Spanish accordingly. And last but not least, you'll be able to toggle the theme of the application to a more appropriate theme for like a dark theme. And for example, if you want to see the light theme, you can just switch it back on. Also, we will show how even when you switch it from the system, like if you switch it to the light theme, the application responds accordingly, and it even switches it and shows it in the application. The application is listening for the system configured theme, and it will react accordingly. Like if I switch it to dark, then you will see everything going back to dark. So it's pretty cool, and you will learn how to do all of that in the upcoming video. So just stay tuned. And then again, that's all I wanted to show you at this point. And then now let's embark into this project. So what I'm going to do is prep these images and I will export them as individual SVGs. Then we will assemble it into the application. As you see here, this is Figma, and then all you need to do is, for example, select the given images. And remember, we will be using the appropriate controls to overlay them and then to hide them, to show or hide them accordingly. So for example, like here, in the case of the labels, like I can just, toggle the labels, just show them all. Or for example, like the coastal line or the borders of every province. So those are images that are just overlaid on top of each other. And then according to the one that you select, then you will show that. So without further ado, why don't we just get started right away? So the first thing that we will do is create a brand new project. So here I am. I'm just going to set up a Visual Studio, and then now we will just create a brand new project. So I'm going to say Flutter, create, let's call it DR map, and then I'm going to use the empty option. So I'm just going to create a brand new project, completely empty. Now I'm going to open into that project. So now I'll open into that project, and remember, since we're going to be using Riverpod Code Generation, we need to bring all of those dependencies. So why don't we start bringing some of the initial dependencies into this project? Let's look at the documentation real quick. We can look into documentation real quick. So you could just go to riverpod.dev, and then it explains how to get started. In our case, we want to click on the get started, and then you see the dependencies that it requires. So immediately you can just either, for Flutter, let's say, since we're building a Flutter application, you can see immediately all the dependencies that you need to add. So I can just add those dependencies right away like this. So I'm just going to grab my dependencies. I can just copy them like this. Should be, pulling from the latest. You can either install them on your own, or you can just grab them like that and add them to your pubspec.yaml. So I can just copy, bring them into my pubspec.yaml right here. So I'm going to bring those dependencies into the pubspec.yaml. I'm just going to hit paste in there and save that. You may need some additional dependencies, but we're going to bring them little by little, which is okay. You can continue relying on the documentation so that you can see how to enable, for example, other options and whatnot. But at least in this particular case, we want to start making sure that, we set up the project initially and that it works well right from the get-go. So I'm going to just run it real quick just to make sure that everything is in place. So since we're going to be building like a Flutter web application, I'm just going to run right away. I'm going to say Flutter run -the Chrome, because we're going to be using Chrome as kind of like our device. And let's just see what it pops up. So at least we should be able to see the basic initial Flutter application for the web. Let's make sure that everything is in order. Then we're going to start bringing other pieces. So everything seems to be in order. Now you want to start setting up Riverpod for your project. So one of the first things that they recommend, you go to the essentials. And then the first thing that you need to do is kind of like wrap your application, the whole application inside of a provider scope widget. So this is the way that you proceed. The same way that they suggest here, after you install Riverpod, you need to add the provider scope above everything, like kind of wrapping your whole application. So if we go to the lib main.dart, you will see that right away we have something called main app. We're going to be renaming this in a minute. Why don't we actually do it right now? So I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it DR main app. And we can call it like that. So then once you've created your main application, you have to surround it by a provider scope. So you have to do provider scope, and then you add that child, your main application around that. So I'm going to just move it around like this. And this is pretty much the main thing that you need to have at the beginning. Provider scope, wrapping your whole application. If you rebuild your application now, no changes should happen because everything should still remain the same. But now you want to start testing whether Riverpod is actually working. So how can you do that? Let's just do one simple test on how to make sure to test your providers. So we can go back to the documentation, and they show you immediately how to do that. So here they show you how you can define a provider from the get-go. Provider is nothing more than kind of like the wrapper that provides your information, provides your data. We're going to be dealing with code generation. So the first thing that you want to do is set up code generation. After you set up your project, that you make sure that everything is well and running, then you want to set up code generation. So for code generation to work, you need to have a build runner. So let's go back to our code. And if you go to a terminal, I'm going to open like another terminal for that. And then you have to run the command dart run build_runner watch. What does this mean? This means that there's a build runner running in the background that is going to be kind of listening for changes for your code as you build providers. It will actually generate some boilerplate code behind the scenes that actually creates all the hooks and creates all the connections to make your application reactive. So what you're going to be doing here when you say dart build runner, what this does is actually activates the code generation. Code generation is optional in Riverpod, and with that in mind, you may wonder whether you should use it or not. The answer is most likely yes, and using code generation is the recommended way to use Riverpod. It is the most future-proof approach that will allow you to use Riverpod to its full potential. And what this does is kind of like running the build runner in the background. We will also touch into other things, but what this will do is so once static meta programming is available in Dart, build runner will no longer be an issue. And at that point, the code generation syntax will be the only syntax available in Riverpod. So you should start using it now so that you can continue leveraging the benefits and the power of Riverpod. So you hit enter, and then what this does is it kind of executes the build runner in the background. Then once you see that the build is running in the background, then you can proceed to add your providers. If we refer back to the documentation, they specify the syntax of how to define a provider. So you have two ways of defining providers, either functional providers or class-based providers. The functional providers can perform side effects, and the class-based actually can perform side effects, and you can expose public methods to update the state that will actually then trigger or notify or broadcast the changes so that the UI can rebuild accordingly. So why don't we do that? You can take a look at this part of the documentation, but I'm going to do it in code. So why don't we do a simple example? So I'm just going to grab, so for example, right here, you see that it says hello world, but I'm just going to create a simple provider for that. In that case, if you want to do the recommended ways, you have to create your providers in a separate file. We're going to get into that in just a minute, but I'm just going to create it right here for the sake of just testing that Riverpod has been appropriately installed. So the way that you do it is you use the Riverpod annotation. So you have to use the Riverpod annotation. Make sure that you add the annotation up here. And the way that you could use it, you could just bring that package Riverpod annotation, Riverpod _annotation, so that the Riverpod annotation gets actually identified. Then we're going to proceed and do a very simple provider. This is just going to provide a simple value that we will read from our application and just display it on the screen. Simple as that. So we're going to say string example. Riverpod providers, when they're functional providers, they receive a reference through their through the function as a parameter, so that then you can tap into kind of like the internals of Riverpod and you can invoke other providers. You can locate other providers via this reference. So you actually have to type ref. You don't have to specify any specific ref here. You just say ref, and then this is just provided to you by Riverpod so that you can locate other providers as needed and you can combine requests and whatnot. We're just going to say return hello. For example, in this case, I'm going to say return hello world from Riverpod instead of for example, the hello world that is here. So now how do you access this provider from inside of this widget, from inside of our main application, just as a sample so that you can test at least that Riverpod is working? Right now it's just still saying hello world, right? So how do you do that? So there are many ways that you can do it. You can either convert this stateless widget into a consumer widget. Is also provided by Riverpod. So I'm going to convert this into a consumer widget. And when you extend consumer widget, you have the widget ref provided to you in a very similar way that providers have the ref provided to them. And just a widget ref is nothing more than a reference of an object that allows widget to locate provider so that they can consume their data. And as you see here in the command line, you will also see that you need to include the generated files, the ones that end in .g.dart, they need to be included as part of the directive. So the way that you do it is you copy, for example, if this is the file where you created your providers, this same reference needs to be added at the top of the file. In this case, because the file is main.dart, there you have to add part main.g.dart. That way it gets picked up, and also the generated file gets referenced, because remember, the build runner, the Dart build runner, is actually generating code behind the scenes for you. A lot of the boilerplate code that creates all the hooks and connections to make this very reactive. And all you need to do is just refer to this generated provider. You're not allowed to touch this file. They even say it right here. You do not modify it by hand, because it creates all the things for you behind the scenes, making it much easier for you. So after the Riverpod provider is created, this provider only returns a simple string. Then now you can refer to it in code by just saying ref.read. In this particular case, I'm just going to be reading. You have the option of doing reading or watching. Reading, if it's just the value that you're just going to read, like a one-time thing. But if you do ref.watch, it's because you want to listen to the changes being broadcasted by that state changing. So in this case, I'm going to refer to that example right here. I just call it example. So Riverpod Code Generation, when it generates code for you, it names it the name of the provider with the suffix provider. So here you say example provider, and then that way you can refer to that to this specific provider. So if you do this, now you should be able to see the word hello world from Riverpod by showing it here. I'm going to rebuild my application, and let's see if it gets picked up, and then that's it. So if you see here, now we see that our provider is actually being read from their application successfully, and then now we can see how everything is well and connected. So this is a very primer on Riverpod. We were able to install the build runner. We have it running in a separate terminal, and this is how you should continue doing it, just keeping it running on a separate terminal. And then you have your application executing hot reload on your application, so you can see the changes being executed. As you make changes to your provider, for example, like in this case, I'm gonna say hello world, for example, let's say I'm gonna type something else, hello testing. As soon as you save the application, you see that Riverpod actually picks it up, and then it kind of like rebuilds the provider, and then the changes get picked up. So get used to that. There's the build runner will always be running in the background, so you just have to be aware of that. Now, let's say you want to create one where the changes are more reactive, instead of being just very like a one-time consumer of those changes. In this particular case, you create it as in the documentation shows, you can create it as a class-based provider. In this way, you can perform those side effects and actually trigger the builds in your UI accordingly. So let's actually do it like that. So in this particular case, I'm going to create a class-based provider. You also have to say Riverpod. And then in this case, I'm going to call it class. You say class example, like example class or example value, for example. In this particular case, you have to follow the documentation and the way that the documentation requires you to create the Riverpod class syntax. I just call it example value so that it doesn't collide with the other. But the syntax, when you create a class-based provider, you have to say extends, and then underscore $, the name of the class that you just created. In this case, example value. Then what you do is you create an override of a build method. Every class-based provider has a build method, and then you have to return the type of the value that this provider is exposing. In my particular case, is going to be a string, and then I'm going to say build, and just going to return by default, let's call it hello Riverpod. So that is the default value that my class-based provider will have, but then I will provide a method so that then I can mutate the state. So I'm going to create a method, just call it update, and it's going to receive a new value. And then all I'm going to do here is just change the state as if you see here in the recommended suggestion. Now, if I save, you see how the squiggly red lines just went away is because the Dart build runner is executing in the background and it's actually generating the new code and updating as I go. And it made it really simple. So you see, this is the difference between a functional kind of like a functional provider and a class-based provider. I just created a class. Extends the same name, underscore $, the name of the class. You override the build method, and then you provide a method through which you can mutate this the state. That way, when you change the state, if there's any widget listening, it will rebuild and show the updated state. So instead of reading this example provider right here, we're going to watch on the example value provider. So let's try to do that. So right here in the build method, I'm going to create a final example. I'll call it example value. And I'm going to ref.watch on my, remember, because it just got generated, example value provider. So you see, it uses the suffix provider after the name of the provider, example value provider. Now, how do I trigger the change? Let's just, for example, right now, just display the value that is just there. So if I rebuild it, I think it's still building. And then if I just reload it, you will see that it says hello Riverpod. But instead of showing it as a text, I'm going to wrap it, for now, I'm going to wrap it inside a column. So I'm going to just do, for example, I'm going to create a column. Right? And I'm going to add it. I'm going to add my text as a child, and I'm going to add an elevated button for now. I'm going to trigger the change from this button by just, for example, saying text, click me to update. And inside of the onPressed event, I am going to now trigger that the update on my provider. So if you see there, I'm going to say, I will type updated Riverpod, for example. And then if you see here how I'm going to use ref.read, the name of my provider, I'm not watching, I'm just reading, to actually access some of the other capabilities that my provider has, which is a method to mutate the state. So after doing that, and then if I reload, I come over, and then if you see right there, why don't we just center the values? I'm going to do main axis alignment center. I will reload. And if you see right there now, when I click, it says hello Riverpod. And when I click me to update, now you see the value updated Riverpod. So let's reload it one more time. You see that it says hello Riverpod. And when I click it, now it changes the state. It notifies the UI by via of the ref.watch. This widget, dr_main.app, is actually listening for changes in the state from this example value provider, and then it just rebuilds accordingly, and then it just shows the updated value. So with that, now we've demonstrated that Riverpod has already been installed effectively. We've already tested showing a simple functional Riverpod provider, and we just show kind of like as a one-time thing. And now we've shown you the example on how to create a class-based provider that allows you not only to read the value, but update its state internally and listen for changes as we update its internal state. And of course, like you saw, the UI just reflects that accordingly. So now that we've covered the basics, let's go on to the next video where we will show you a lot more complex cases, and we start building our application from the ground up. Okay, so see you on the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Hey everyone, I'm Roman. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on other Flutter content coming my way. Thank you so much for your support. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media.